This is not just a story of conquest, but of human dignity tested in the face of absolute power, where mercy becomes treason and survival demands the surrender of one's soul. The morning mist clung to the Rhine's banks like the breath of dying men. Marcus Aurelius Corvus adjusted his centurion's crest against the bitter Germanic wind, his weathered hands gripping the pommel of his gladius as he surveyed the aftermath of what historians would barely mention in their chronicles. Yet another minor skirmish that had cost Rome 3 centuries and the barbarians their freedom. The battlefield stretched before him like a painter's vision of Hades. Germanic warriors lay scattered among the tall grass, their blonde hair matted with blood that had frozen in the pre-dawn cold. But it wasn't the dead that made Marcus's stomach turn. It was the living. Centurion. The voice belonged to Gaius Brutus, a young Optio whose enthusiasm for Roman glory had yet to be tempered by the reality of what that glory demanded. The prisoners are secured, 43 captured, including their war chief. Marcus nodded, his gray eyes taking in the line of chained men. These weren't the savage beasts that Roman propaganda painted them to be. They were fathers, sons, brothers, men who had fought for their lands just as Marcus had fought for his. The irony wasn't lost on him that he, too, had been born in a Roman province, his grandfather a conquered Gaul who had earned citizenship through military service. "The war chief, show me," Marcus commanded, his voice carrying the authority of 25 years in the legions. They walked past the other prisoners, and Marcus couldn't help but notice how the Germanic warriors held themselves even in defeat. No begging, no pleading, just the quiet dignity of men who had accepted their fate. It reminded him of his own grandfather's stories about the last stand of Vercingetorix. At the end of the line stood a man who could only be their leader. Tall even by Germanic standards, with piercing blue eyes and a beard the color of autumn wheat, he bore the distinctive torque of gold around his neck that marked him as nobility among his people. Despite the chains that bound his wrists, he stood straight, meeting Marcus's gaze without flinching. "What is your name?" Marcus asked in the Germanic tongue he had learned during his years on the frontier. The chieftain's eyes showed surprise at hearing his native language from Roman lips. "I am Alaric, son of Wulfric, chief of the Cherusci. And you speak our words well for a Roman dog." A younger legionnaire moved to strike the prisoner for his insolence, but Marcus stayed his hand. "Your courage serves you well, Alaric, son of Wulfric. You'll need it for what's to come." "We fought honorably," Alaric replied, his voice steady despite the chains. "We defended our lands, our families. There's no shame in that." Marcus felt something twist in his chest, an emotion he had learned to suppress long ago. "No," he said quietly, "there is no shame in that." The sound of approaching horses interrupted their exchange. A cloud of dust announced the arrival of the imperial courier, his red cloak bearing the personal seal of Emperor Domitian. The man dismounted with practiced precision, his face bearing the pale complexion of one who spent his days in marble halls rather than muddy battlefields. "I bring word from the divine Domitian," the courier announced, his voice carrying across the camp. "The prisoners are to be transported to Rome immediately. The emperor desires to make an example that will echo across all Germania." Marcus felt his blood chill. He had served under 3 emperors, and he knew what Domitian's examples entailed. The man who had declared himself master and god had turned cruelty into an art form, and the Colosseum had become his canvas. "All of them?" Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. "All of them. The emperor has planned something special for their arrival. The people of Rome will witness the price of defying the empire." The courier's smile held no warmth. "You are to escort them personally, centurion. The emperor has heard of your exemplary service on the frontier." As the courier departed, Marcus looked again at the line of prisoners. 43 men who had committed no crime other than defending their homeland. He thought of his own son, barely 16, training with the youth corps in Rome. What would the boy think of his father's work? What would Marcus's own grandfather think? "When do we leave?" Gaius asked, his earlier enthusiasm now tempered by the grim reality of their orders. "At first light," Marcus replied, his voice hollow. "Prepare the wagons." And Gaius, "Make sure the men understand that these prisoners are to arrive in Rome alive and unharmed. The emperor wants them in good condition for whatever he has planned." That night, as the Roman camp settled into its routine of watches and quiet conversations around cook fires, Marcus found himself walking among the prisoners. They sat in groups, sharing what meager rations they had been given, some singing low songs in their native tongue, songs that spoke of home, of loved ones, of green forests they would never see again. Alaric sat apart from the others, his chains glinting in the firelight. As Marcus approached, the Germanic chief looked up. "You have the look of a man with something to say, Roman." Marcus sat on a nearby stone, his armor clanking softly. "I've been a soldier for 25 years. I've fought in Britain, in Gaul, in Dacia. I've seen what happens to those who are taken to Rome for the emperor's entertainment, and yet you serve him still." "I serve Rome," Marcus corrected. "There's a difference, though sometimes I wonder if that difference matters to the dead." Alaric studied the centurion's face in the flickering light. "You speak our language. You know our customs. You are not like the others. My grandfather was conquered by Rome, just as you have been. He chose to serve rather than die, and through his service, our family gained citizenship, land, position. I am what Rome makes of those it conquers, if they survive the process. And what does Rome make of those who refuse to serve?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "Examples," he said finally. "Terrible examples." The next morning dawned gray and cold, the kind of day that seemed to press down on men's souls. The wagons were loaded, the prisoners chained in groups of 5, and the long journey to Rome began. Marcus rode at the head of the column, his mind heavy with the knowledge of what awaited these men in the eternal city. As they traveled south, leaving behind the forests and rivers of Germania, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he was not just transporting prisoners, but escorting them to their doom. And perhaps in some way, escorting himself to his own reckoning with the empire he had served faithfully for so long. Behind him, the wheels of the prison wagons creaked and groaned, carrying their human cargo toward a fate that would shock even the bloodthirsty crowds of Rome, and reveal the true depths of an emperor's madness. The Colosseum rose before them like a monument to human cruelty, its limestone walls gleaming in the harsh Roman sun. Marcus had seen it many times before, but never as the escort of men destined for its sand-covered floor. The amphitheater could hold 50,000 spectators, and today it would be filled to capacity. Word had spread throughout the city that Emperor Domitian had planned something unprecedented for the Germanic prisoners. "By the gods," whispered Gaius, riding beside his centurion. "Look at the crowds." The streets leading to the Colosseum were packed with citizens eager for the spectacle. Merchants hawked food and wine, children darted between the legs of adults, and the air buzzed with anticipation. This was more than mere entertainment. It was a celebration of Roman dominance, a reminder to all present of the price of defying the empire. Marcus guided his horse through the crowd, the wagon train following behind. He could hear the prisoners talking quietly among themselves in their native tongue, and he caught fragments of their conversation. They were not discussing escape or rescue. They were saying goodbye to each other, sharing final words as men do when they know death is near. At the gladiator entrance to the Colosseum, they were met by Lucius Cassius, the lanista who managed the emperor's private games. A thin man with calculating eyes and soft hands that had never held a sword in anger, he examined the prisoners like a merchant appraising livestock. "Excellent specimens," he murmured, walking among the chained men. "The crowd will be pleased. The emperor has outdone himself this time." "What exactly has he planned?" Marcus asked, though part of him didn't want to know. Cassius smiled, and the expression made Marcus's skin crawl. "Something that will be remembered for generations. These barbarians dared to believe they could stand against Rome. Today they will learn, as will every person in this amphitheater, what happens to those who harbor such delusions." The prisoners were herded into the holding cells beneath the arena, the same chambers where gladiators prepared for combat and wild animals paced before their release into the ring. The air was thick with the smell of fear, sweat, and death, an odor that had soaked into the very stones over decades of bloodshed. Marcus found himself following the prisoners down into the underground complex, unable to walk away from men he had come to respect during their long journey from Germania. The cells were cramped, barely large enough for a man to lie down, and the sound of the crowd above filtered through the stone like distant thunder. "Centurion!" Alaric called out as Marcus passed his cell. "A word?" Marcus stopped, looking through the iron bars at the Germanic chief. The man had maintained his dignity throughout their journey, never once begging or showing fear, even as they passed crucified rebels along the Roman roads, silent warnings of imperial justice. "I would ask a favor," Alaric said, his voice steady despite their surroundings. "I'm listening. My youngest son, Wulfric, is among the prisoners. He is barely 18, fought in his first battle. When the time comes," Alaric's voice caught slightly, "when the time comes, help him die with honor. Do not let them make sport of his fear." Marcus felt something break inside his chest. "I cannot interfere with the Emperor's will. I do not ask you to interfere. I ask you to remember that he is a boy who fought for his family, his people. In your heart, if not in your actions, remember that he deserves better than what awaits him." Before Marcus could respond, the sound of trumpets echoed through the chambers. The games were beginning. Above them, Emperor Domitian entered his imperial box to thunderous applause. The self-proclaimed master and god wore a purple toga trimmed with gold, and a laurel crown sat upon his head. At 38, he was in his prime, his dark eyes scanning the crowd with the satisfaction of a man who held absolute power over life and death. "Citizens of Rome," his voice boomed across the amphitheater, amplified by the arena's acoustics. "Today you witness the fate of those who dare challenge our divine empire. These Germanic dogs thought they could resist the eagles of Rome. Today, they will provide entertainment for your pleasure and education for any who might harbor thoughts of rebellion." The crowd roared its approval, 50,000 voices rising as one in bloodthirsty anticipation. In the holding cells below, Marcus watched as the first group of prisoners was led toward the arena entrance. Among them was Wulfric, Alaric's son, a young man with his father's blue eyes but without the weathered confidence of a seasoned warrior. The boy was trying to hide his fear, but Marcus could see his hands trembling as the guards fastened his chains. "What are they going to do to us?" Wulfric asked in broken Latin, looking at Marcus with desperate hope. Marcus wanted to lie, to offer false comfort, but he had seen too much of Roman justice to believe in gentle falsehoods. "Die with honor," he said simply. "That is all any man can do." The arena doors opened and sunlight flooded the entrance tunnel. The roar of the crowd washed over them like a physical force. The first group of prisoners was pushed into the ring, blinking in the harsh light, the sand rough beneath their bare feet. What happened next would haunt Marcus for the rest of his days. Emperor Domitian had not planned a simple execution or even a traditional beast hunt. Instead, he had devised a series of elaborate tortures designed to maximize both the suffering of the prisoners and the entertainment value for the crowd. The Germanic warriors were not given weapons or armor. They were simply prey in a carefully orchestrated nightmare. First came the fire. Servants of the arena brought forth braziers filled with glowing coals and long iron brands. The prisoners were chained to posts while masked figures approached with the heated metal. The screams that echoed through the Colosseum were not the quick cries of battle, but the prolonged agony of men being slowly burned alive. The crowd cheered with each scream, their bloodlust fed by the spectacle of suffering. Children sat on their fathers' shoulders, clapping their hands at the entertainment. Noble women fanned themselves delicately while watching men's flesh sizzle and bubble. Marcus felt bile rise in his throat. He had seen death in battle, had killed men in fair combat, but this was something different. This was cruelty elevated to art, suffering transformed into spectacle. In the second phase, wild animals were released, not to kill quickly, but to maim and terrorize. Wolves, bears, and great cats were trained to attack, but not to finish their prey. The prisoners, already weakened by the branding, were forced to run and dodge while the beasts nipped and clawed at them, drawing blood but avoiding fatal wounds. Young Wulfric stumbled and fell, a wolf seizing his leg. The boy's scream of pain and terror pierced the air, and Marcus saw Alaric in the holding cell, his face a mask of anguish as he listened to his son suffering. "Stop this," Marcus whispered, though he knew his words were meaningless. "This is madness." But the worst was yet to come. In the final act of Domitian's theater of cruelty, the surviving prisoners, those who had endured the burning and the beasts, were brought before the imperial box. There, on a platform where all could see, they were subjected to the ultimate humiliation. The emperor himself descended from his box, a curved dagger in his hand. One by one, he personally inflicted wounds designed not to kill, but to cause maximum pain and degradation. He carved symbols into their flesh, marking them as his property, his conquered enemies, his playthings. When it was Wulfric's turn, the boy tried to stand straight, to face his tormentor with courage. But he was just 18, wounded and terrified, and when Domitian's blade bit into his chest, the boy cried out for his father. The sound echoed through the arena, and for a moment, the crowd fell silent. Even in their bloodlust, something in that cry, the universal sound of a child in pain, touched something human in their hearts. But only for a moment. Then Domitian raised his arms, and the crowd cheered again, their momentary humanity swept away by the spectacle of power. It took 4 hours for all the prisoners to die. 4 hours of systematic torture, humiliation, and degradation that the crowd consumed like a fine wine. When the last man finally expired, the sand of the arena was soaked with blood, and the emperor stood triumphant, his toga stained with the gore of his enemies. "Let this be a lesson to all who would defy Rome," Domitian declared, his voice carrying across the now silent amphitheater. "This is the fate that awaits any who dare challenge the divine will of your emperor." As the crowd began to disperse, chattering excitedly about the day's entertainment, Marcus made his way to the arena floor. The bodies lay scattered across the sand, men who had fought bravely for their homeland, reduced to broken, tortured corpses, for the amusement of Roman citizens. He found Wulfric's body near the center of the arena, the boy's face finally peaceful in death. Nearby lay other warriors who had shown courage and honor in their final moments, despite the inhuman treatment they had received. "Centurion," the voice belonged to Cassius, the lanista. "The emperor wishes to see you." Marcus followed the man to the imperial box, where Domitian sat surrounded by his courtiers, drinking wine and accepting congratulations on the day's spectacle. The emperor's eyes were bright with excitement, his face flushed with the intoxication of absolute power. "Ah, Centurion Corvus," Domitian said, his voice jovial. "You brought us excellent entertainment today. Did you enjoy the show?" Marcus stood at attention, his face carefully neutral. "The prisoners showed courage in their final moments, Caesar. They died as warriors." "Warriors?" Domitian laughed, and his courtiers joined in. "They died as all enemies of Rome must die, in agony and degradation. That is the only death appropriate for those who dare oppose us." "Yes, Caesar," Marcus replied, because there was nothing else he could say. "Tell me, Centurion, what did you think of our little innovations today? The burning brands, the trained beasts, the personal touch of imperial justice? Quite creative, don't you think?" Marcus looked into the emperor's eyes and saw not the wisdom of a ruler or the strength of a conqueror, but the gleeful madness of a man who had confused cruelty with power, who had mistaken the ability to inflict suffering for true strength. It was memorable, Caesar. Indeed, and the memory will spread throughout the barbarian lands. They will know that Roman justice is swift, certain, and terrifying. No one will dare rebel against us again. But as Marcus looked out over the blood-soaked arena, where slaves were already beginning to drag away the bodies and rake fresh sand over the stains, he wondered if Domitian truly understood what he had created. The emperor believed he had demonstrated Roman power, but Marcus saw something different. He saw the moment when Rome's strength had become weakness, when its justice had become mere cruelty, when its civilization had revealed itself to be barbarism dressed in purple and gold. That night, as Marcus walked through the streets of Rome, he passed taverns where citizens excitedly recounted the day's entertainment. Children played games, pretending to be Romans torturing barbarians. The spectacle had indeed become a memory, but not the kind that would deter rebellion. Instead, it would be remembered as the day Rome revealed its true nature to the world. And somewhere in the forests of Germania, in the hills of Gaul, in the mountains of Britannia, other warriors would hear the tale of what had happened to their brothers in the Colosseum. They would learn not fear, but hatred. They would understand not Roman justice, but Roman cruelty. And they would remember. The irony was not lost on Marcus that in trying to prevent rebellion through terror, Domitian had instead planted the seeds of future uprisings. The Germanic tribes would unite not in submission, but in shared outrage. The emperor's example would become a rallying cry for every people who had suffered under Roman rule. As Marcus reached his modest home in the Subura district, he found his teenage son waiting for him, eager to hear about the day's games. The boy's eyes shone with excitement as he asked about the battles, the gladiators, the spectacle. "Father, they say it was the greatest games ever held, that the emperor himself killed the barbarian chiefs. Tell me everything." Marcus looked at his son, a Roman citizen, born to privilege and opportunity, raised on stories of Roman glory and honor. How could he explain what he had witnessed? How could he describe the systematic destruction of human dignity that the city had cheered? "It was a day that showed the true face of power," Marcus said finally. "Remember this, my son. The ability to inflict suffering is not strength. The willingness to show mercy is not weakness. And the man who mistakes cruelty for justice will ultimately destroy everything he claims to protect." His son looked confused, but Marcus was too tired to explain further. He had served Rome faithfully for 25 years, had fought its battles, and enforced its will across the known world. But today, in the blood-soaked sand of the Colosseum, he had seen the difference between the Rome he had believed he was serving and the Rome that actually existed, and that knowledge would change everything. As he lay in his bed that night, Marcus could still hear the echoes of the crowd's cheers, the screams of the dying, and the sound of a young man crying for his father. These sounds would follow him for the rest of his days, a reminder of the day when Rome's greatest triumph had revealed itself to be its most shameful defeat. The Germanic warriors were dead, their bodies already burned or thrown into the Tiber. But their sacrifice had accomplished something Domitian never intended. It had shown the world that Rome's power rested not on justice or honor, but on the ability to inflict unimaginable suffering on those who dared to oppose it. And in the end, that revelation would prove more dangerous to the empire than any barbarian army ever could be. The cruelty of the Romans had reached its zenith under Domitian, but in doing so, it had also sown the seeds of its own destruction. The empire would survive for centuries more, but the moral authority that had once made Rome great had died in the arena that day, tortured to death for the entertainment of 50,000 cheering citizens. History would remember this as just another successful games, another demonstration of imperial power. But for those who witnessed it, for those who participated in it, and for those who would hear the tale in distant lands, it would be remembered as something else entirely, as the day Rome revealed that its civilization was just barbarism with better architecture, and its justice was just cruelty with legal sanction. The eagles of Rome still soared over most of the known world, but their wings were now stained with innocent blood, and their cry had become the sound of a dying civilization that no longer remembered the difference between strength and sadism.